The desert is silent, yet alive. Beneath the endless sweep of stars, the sands of Egypt whisper secrets older than memory. Pyramids loom like frozen mountains, their edges sharp against the night sky, and the Nile glimmers faintly, a silver ribbon winding through eternity. It is here, in this land of dust and wonder, that two guardians rise above all others: Anubis, the jackal-headed keeper of the dead, and Thoth, the ibis-headed master of wisdom. From the moment you step into their world, you feel the weight of their presence. Anubis waits in the shadows, calm and watchful, his black form a reminder that death is not chaos but passage. Thoth stands in the light of the moon, scroll in hand, his eyes steady, his mind vast, recording every word, every deed, every breath. Together they are balance, one guiding souls into eternity, the other preserving the wisdom of life. It is a strange partnership, yet it defines Egypt itself. The people rise with the sun, labor beneath its blaze, and rest beneath the stars, knowing that these two gods walk beside them. Anubis guards the tombs, ensuring that the dead are honored, their bodies preserved, their souls guided. Thoth guards the living, ensuring that knowledge is remembered, laws are written, prayers are recorded. Without Anubis, death would be chaos. Without Thoth, life would be forgotten. The story of Egypt is not only pyramids and pharaohs, but the quiet rhythm of survival, the balance of shadow and light, the guardianship of wisdom and death. Anubis and Thoth are not distant figures carved in stone. They are companions in every moment, shaping the way mortals live, die, and dream. And so, as the stars glitter above and the Nile flows silently, you realize that this is not just history, it is myth woven into eternity. A story that hums like a lullaby across the sands. You close your eyes, carried by the rhythm of gods, and drift into the secrets of Egypt. If you love mythology and history from all cultures and forbidden ancient stories, subscribe, because this channel reveals the secrets behind every myth. And let me know from where you're watching. Hopefully not from under a pyramid, because internet reception there is terrible. The sands of Egypt hold countless secrets, but none more enduring than the silent figure of Anubis. His jackal head, sleek and watchful, peers from the shadows of tombs, reminding mortals that death is not chaos, but a passage. To the Egyptians, Anubis was not a figure of fear, but of calm assurance, the one who guided souls through the most uncertain journey of all. In the embalming chambers, his presence was everywhere. Priests worked tirelessly, their hands steady as they wrapped linen around lifeless bodies, their voices whispering prayers into the still air. The scent of resin and oils filled the room, thick and heavy, clinging to the walls. You would wrinkle your nose, perhaps shiver at the sight of lifeless eyes. But for the Egyptians, this was sacred work. Anubis oversaw it all, ensuring that the body was preserved, that the soul would not wander lost in the desert of eternity. The jackal was no random choice. Jackals prowled the edges of villages, scavenging near cemeteries, their sleek forms slipping through the night. To the Egyptians, this was not a threat but a symbol, a reminder that Anubis watched over the dead, guarding them from harm. His black fur symbolized the fertile soil left behind by the Nile's flood, the promise of rebirth even in death. You would falter at the thought of a scavenger as a guardian, but the Egyptians saw wisdom in the balance of nature. Anubis was also the guide of the soul. In the great hall of judgment, he led the deceased to the scales. where the heart was weighed against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. His jackal eyes watched closely, his calm presence steadying the trembling soul. If the heart was light, the soul passed into paradise. If heavy with sin, it was devoured by Amit, the crocodile-headed beast. You would tremble at the thought of your heart exposed, your deeds weighed. But for the Egyptians, this was justice, this was balance, this was eternity. His role was not only in death, but in protection. Tombs were guarded by his image, painted on walls, carved into statues, invoked in prayers. Families believed that Anubis stood watch, keeping thieves away, keeping spirits safe, keeping chaos at bay. You would falter at the thought of sleeping beneath his gaze. But for the Egyptians, this was comfort. To be seen by Anubis was to be protected, to be remembered, to be part of eternity. And so, beneath the starry sky, in the silence of the desert, Anubis waits. He does not rush, he does not falter, he does not forget. He is the calm guardian of the afterlife, the silent companion of every soul, the jackal who walks between shadow and eternity. In the hush of Egypt's temples, where incense curled into the air and the walls glowed with painted hieroglyphs, one figure stood as the embodiment of intellect and order, Thoth, the god of wisdom. His ibis head tilted with quiet curiosity, his hands forever poised with scroll and stylus, recording the rhythm of the universe. If Anubis was the calm guardian of death, Thoth was the patient architect of thought, the one who ensured that chaos never swallowed truth. Thoth was said to have invented writing, gifting humanity the ability to preserve memory beyond the fragile span of a single lifetime. Imagine the scratch of reed pens across papyrus, the careful strokes of birds, eyes, and serpents forming words that bound reality together. You would marvel at the artistry, perhaps stumble over the symbols. But for the Egyptians, these were not mere marks, they were spells of permanence, anchors against the tide of forgetting. His wisdom stretched far beyond writing. Thoth was the keeper of laws, the recorder of time, the measurer of the stars. He balanced the heavens with the earth, ensuring that the sun rose, the moon waxed and waned, and the Nile flowed in rhythm with the cosmos. You would falter at the thought of one god holding so much responsibility, but for the Egyptians, this was comfort. To know that Thoth watched the skies was to believe that order would endure. In myths, Thoth often appeared as a mediator, settling disputes among gods, restoring harmony when chaos threatened. His voice was calm, his words precise, his presence steady. He was not a warrior, not a ruler, but a scribe, and yet his power was immense. Knowledge was his weapon, wisdom his shield, truth his crown. You would smile at the thought of a god who wins arguments with logic, but for the Egyptians, this was divine strength. Thoth's influence seeped into daily life. Farmers counted their harvests with his blessing. Scribes copied texts under his gaze. Priests recited prayers, invoking his name. Every act of record, every measure of grain, every tally of stars was a tribute to his wisdom. You would falter at the monotony of numbers. But the Egyptians saw beauty in the balance, in the certainty that nothing was lost, nothing forgotten. And so, beneath the starry sky, in the silence of temples, Thoth waits. His ibis eyes gleam with patience, his scrolls filled with eternity, his wisdom woven into the fabric of the world. He is the god of knowledge, the scribe of the gods, the keeper of truth. In the temples of Egypt, power was not always measured in gold or armies, but in symbols, The gods carried objects that spoke louder than words, and none were more telling than the staff and the scroll. These were not mere ornaments, but extensions of divine authority, tools that shaped the rhythm of life and death. Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian, was often depicted with a staff, tall, straight, and unyielding. It was more than a walking stick. It was a symbol of guidance. Just as he led souls through the hall of judgment, the staff represented his role as a shepherd of the dead, steadying them as they crossed into eternity. Its presence reminded mortals that even in the silence of death, there was direction, there was order, there was a path. Thoth, the eye-besetted scribe, carried the scroll. Rolled tightly, bound with care, it contained the words of gods and men alike. Within its fibers lay laws, prayers, and wisdom, preserved against the erosion of time. The scroll was not simply paper, but permanence, a reminder that knowledge could outlast flesh, that memory could endure beyond generations. To see Thoth with his scroll was to know that nothing was forgotten, that every deed was recorded, that truth was eternal. Together, the staff and scroll formed a balance. One guided the soul, the other preserved the word. One steadied the journey into death, the other ensured that life was remembered. They were not weapons, not crowns, but symbols of guardianship, of wisdom, of the quiet power that defined Egypt. In the flicker of torchlight, carved into temple walls, painted on papyrus, these symbols spoke silently to all who saw them. They reminded mortals that the gods were near, that their presence was woven into every ritual, every prayer, every breath. The staff and scroll were not distant relics, but living emblems of balance, carried by the guardians of eternity. When the sun finally slipped behind the desert horizon, Egypt transformed into a kingdom of stars. The heat of the day gave way to a cool hush, and the sky stretched endlessly, a black canvas scattered with shimmering lights. For the Egyptians, the night was not emptiness, but a living map, a cosmic scroll written by the gods themselves. The villagers looked upward and saw more than stars. They saw stories, patterns, and promises. Each constellation was a reminder that the heavens mirrored the order of the earth. The great river flowed beneath, the stars flowed above, and together they formed a rhythm that bound mortals to eternity. You might gaze at the same sky today and see only distant suns, but for the Egyptians, every sparkle was a message, every cluster a symbol of divine balance. Anubis was imagined moving silently beneath this canopy, his jackal form blending into the shadows, his watchful eyes reflecting the starlight. He was the guardian of the night, ensuring that souls did not wander aimlessly, that tombs remained protected, that silence was preserved. The stars above seemed to echo his calm presence, steady and unyielding, guiding mortals through the darkness. Thoth, meanwhile, was the scribe of the cosmos, his ibis head tilted toward the heavens, his scroll filled with the movements of stars and the rhythm of the moon. He measured time by their patterns, recorded their journeys, and ensured that the balance of the universe was preserved. The Egyptians believed that his wisdom was written in the constellations, that the night sky itself was his library. The desert at night was serene, its silence broken only by the hum of insects and the distant cry of animals. Villagers slept on rooftops, their mats spread beneath the stars, their dreams mingling with the cosmic order above. Priests stood in temple courtyards, lifting their arms to the heavens, whispering prayers to the gods who wrote their fate in starlight. The night was not feared but revered, a reminder that the universe was vast eternal, and filled with meaning. And so, beneath the starry night, Egypt breathed. The Nile shimmered faintly. The pyramids loomed like dark silhouettes, and the gods watched silently from the heavens. Anubis guarded the shadows, Thoth recorded the stars, and together they ensured that the rhythm of life and death continued, steady as the constellations above. The walls of Egypt were never silent. Every temple, every tomb, every monument was covered in hieroglyphs, intricate carvings of birds, eyes, serpents, and symbols that seemed to dance across stone. To the untrained eye, they were decoration, but to the Egyptians, they were living words, spells of permanence, whispers of eternity. Hieroglyphs were not simply writing, they were bridges between worlds. Each symbol carried layers of meaning, a picture that spoke both to mortals and to gods. A falcon was not just a bird, but Horus, the sky god. An eye was not just vision, but protection, the eye of Ra, watching over creation. Even the simplest marks carried weight, binding the physical to the divine. You might see them as art, but for the Egyptians, they were power carved into stone. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was believed to have gifted humanity this sacred script. His scrolls overflowed with hieroglyphs, each stroke precise, each word eternal. He taught scribes to record laws, prayers, and stories, ensuring that nothing was lost to time. The act of writing was not mundane, but mystical, a ritual that preserved truth against the erosion of memory. Hidden messages were everywhere. Tomb walls told stories of journeys into the afterlife, guiding souls with instructions for the trials ahead. Temples recorded rituals, prayers, and offerings, ensuring that the gods were honored properly. Even everyday objects, amulets, pottery, tools, bore inscriptions, small spells to protect, to bless, to guide. The Egyptians believed that words themselves carried magic, that to carve a name was to give it life. Anubis appeared often in these carvings, his jackal form etched beside coffins, his staff raised in protection. He was not only a guardian in flesh, but in symbol. His image, a spell against chaos. Thoth appeared with his scroll, recording the deeds of mortals, his ibis head tilted in calm observation. Together they filled the walls with presence, reminding all who entered that wisdom and death were never far apart. The hieroglyphs shimmered in torchlight, their shadows dancing across stone, their meanings layered like the desert sands. Priests read them aloud, their voices echoing through chambers, their words carrying power into the air. Villagers gazed at them with awe, knowing that even if they could not read, the gods could. The carvings were not for mortals alone, but for eternity itself. And so, Egypt spoke through stone. Its hieroglyphs were not silent marks, but living messages, mystical bridges between worlds, hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. Thoth preserved them, Anubis guarded them, and together they ensured that wisdom and death were etched forever into the fabric of the land. In ancient Egypt, Thoth was not confined to temples or myths. His influence reached into the rhythm of everyday existence. He was the quiet architect of order, the god whose wisdom shaped the way people lived, worked, and prayed. To the Egyptians, Thoth was more than a divine scribe. He was the steady presence that kept chaos at bay. Farmers felt his guidance when they measured the Nile's floodwaters, calculating how far the river would spread and when to plant their crops. These measurements were not mere guesses, but reflections of Thoth's gift of numbers and calculation. Each stalk of grain planted with precision was a tribute to his wisdom. Scribes, bent over papyrus scrolls, echoed his presence with every stroke of their reed pens. They recorded harvests, laws, and prayers, preserving memory against the erosion of time. Writing was not a mundane task, but a sacred act, a ritual that bound human deeds to eternity. Without Thoth, words would vanish, and history would dissolve into silence. Priests invoked him in rituals, timing festivals by the movement of the moon and the stars. Thoth was the keeper of calendars, the measurer of time, ensuring that ceremonies aligned with cosmic order. His wisdom was not abstract but practical, woven into the rhythm of worship and the cycles of the heavens. Even in homes, his influence lingered. Merchants tallied goods with fairness, children learned to count with pebbles, and families wore amulets inscribed with protective hieroglyphs. Thoth's presence was subtle but constant, shaping daily life with balance and truth. He was not a god of thunder or conquest, but of patience and precision. The Egyptians believed that death was not an end but a passage, and Anubis was the silent guide who ensured that every soul found its way. His jackal form, sleek and watchful, appeared at the threshold of eternity, leading the deceased into the great hall of judgment. Here, the heart of the dead was placed upon the scales, balanced against the feather of Mat, the goddess of truth. Anubis stood calmly beside the scales, his presence steadying the trembling soul. He was not a punisher, but a guardian, ensuring that the weighing was fair, that justice was preserved. If the heart was light, the soul passed into paradise, a realm of green fields and endless abundance. If heavy with sin, the heart was devoured by Ammit, the crocodile-headed beast, and the soul dissolved into nothingness. This was not cruelty, but balance, the natural rhythm of life and death. The journey of the soul was filled with trials. Texts carved into tomb walls described rivers to cross, gates to pass, demons to face. Anubis guided the soul through each challenge, his staff a symbol of direction, his jackal eyes piercing the shadows. He was the companion in darkness, the one who ensured that the dead did not wander, lost. Offerings in tombs, bread, beer, onions, figs, were not placed for the body, but for the soul. Anubis oversaw these rituals, ensuring that the spirit was nourished, that it had strength for the journey. Families prayed to him, trusting that he would protect their loved ones, that he would carry them safely into eternity. In this way, Anubis was more than a god of death. He was a guide, a protector, a companion. The Egyptians did not fear him. They trusted him, for in the silence of the afterlife, his presence was the promise that the soul would not be forgotten, that the journey would lead to balance, to eternity, to peace. Across the sands of Egypt rose structures that seemed to defy time, temples carved from stone, their walls covered in hieroglyphs, their courtyards echoing with chants. These temples were not merely places of ritual. They were living centers of wisdom and worship, where gods like Thoth and Anubis were honored and their presence woven into the rhythm of daily life. Within the cool shadows of temple halls, priests moved with deliberate grace. They carried offerings of bread, beer, and incense, their voices rising in hymns that filled the air with solemn beauty. Each ritual was carefully timed, aligned with the movements of the sun, moon, and stars, a reflection of Thoth's mastery of cosmic order. His wisdom guided the ceremonies, ensuring that every prayer was spoken at the right moment, every gesture aligned with divine balance. Anubis, too, was honored in these sacred spaces. His statues stood watch near burial chambers, his jackal form carved into walls, reminding worshippers that death was not chaos, but transition. Rituals of embalming and funerary rites were often connected to temple practices, with Anubis invoked as protector of the dead. The temples were not only places of worship for the living, but guardians of the journey into eternity. These structures were also schools of knowledge. Scribes gathered in temple libraries, copying texts onto papyrus, preserving myths, laws, and astronomical records. The temples became repositories of wisdom, their scrolls echoing Thoth's gift of writing. To step into a temple was to step into a universe of knowledge, where the divine and the mortal met in ink and stone. The grandeur of these temples was not in their size alone, but in their purpose. They were bridges between earth and sky, places where mortals could touch eternity, where gods could guide humanity. In their silence, wisdom lingered. In their rituals, balance endured. Temples of wisdom and worship stood as reminders that Egypt's strength lay not only in its monuments, but in its devotion to the guardians of truth and death. When the sun slipped beneath the horizon, the desert of Egypt revealed a different kind of majesty. The heat of the day gave way to a cool hush, and the vast sands stretched endlessly under the velvet sky. The silence was profound, broken only by the faint rustle of wind sweeping across dunes and the distant cry of nocturnal creatures. To the Egyptians, this was not emptiness, but a sacred stillness, a reminder that the land itself breathed in rhythm with the cosmos. The pyramids stood as dark silhouettes against the starlit sky, their sharp edges softened by moonlight. Temples glowed faintly from the flicker of oil lamps, their walls whispering prayers carved in stone. Villagers rested on rooftops, gazing upward at constellations that seemed close enough to touch. The desert at night was not feared, but revered, a place where mortals felt the presence of gods more keenly than in the bustle of day. Anubis was imagined wandering these landscapes, his jackal form blending seamlessly with the shadows. He was the silent guardian of tombs, ensuring that the dead remained undisturbed, that chaos did not creep into the sacred silence. His calm presence was mirrored in the stillness of the dunes, steady and unyielding. Thoth, too, was present in the night. His wisdom was seen in the stars, each constellation a record of cosmic order. The moon, waxing and waning, was his clock, measuring time with precision. Priests lifted their eyes to the heavens, reading the patterns as if they were scrolls written by the god himself. The desert at night was serene, yet alive with meaning. It was a canvas of silence, painted with starlight, guarded by gods and cherished by mortals. In its vastness, Egyptians found peace, balance, and the quiet assurance that the universe was steady, eternal, and filled with wisdom. In the heart of Egyptian belief, life and death were not opposites, but partners in a delicate balance. The Nile's floods brought both destruction and renewal. The sun's blaze gave both life and exhaustion, and the tombs themselves were built not to mourn endings, but to prepare for continuations. The Egyptians understood that existence was a cycle, and at the center of this cycle stood Anubis and Thoth, guardians of shadow and wisdom. Anubis embodied the inevitability of death. His jackal form reminded mortals that every life would one day pass into silence. Yet his calm presence assured them that this silence was not chaos. He guided souls through judgment, ensuring that death was not an abyss, but a doorway. His role was not to terrify, but to steady, to remind mortals that endings were part of the rhythm of eternity. Thoth, in contrast, embodied the permanence of knowledge. His scrolls preserved the deeds of mortals. His wisdom measured the stars. His words bound truth into the fabric of the universe. He reminded humanity that life was not fleeting, that memory and order could endure beyond the grave. Where Anubis guided the soul, Thoth preserved its story. Together they formed balance. One ensured that death was not chaos. The other ensured that life was not forgotten. Their partnership reflected the Egyptian view of existence, that shadow and light, silence and speech, endings and continuations were all threads of the same tapestry. The balance of life and death was not feared but embraced. Families honored ancestors with offerings, trusting Anubis to guide them. Scribes recorded laws and prayers, trusting Thoth to preserve them. Mortals lived with the knowledge that both gods walked beside them, one in shadow, one in light, each ensuring that the cycle endured. In this balance lay Egypt's strength. Life was fragile, death inevitable, but together they formed a rhythm that carried mortals into eternity. The Egyptians did not resist this truth. They accepted it, trusting their guardians to keep the scales steady, the scrolls intact, and the cycle unbroken. In the vast tapestry of Egyptian mythology, animals were never chosen at random. Each creature carried meaning, its form woven into the identity of the gods. For Thoth, the ibis was his sacred symbol. For Anubis, the jackal was his eternal companion. These animals were not simply decorative, but embodied the essence of divine power and purpose. The ibis, with its long curved beak and graceful stance, was a bird often seen along the banks of the Nile. Its careful movements mirrored Thoth's precision, its presence near water reflecting the flow of wisdom and knowledge. Egyptians saw the ibis as a creature of balance, poised between earth and sky. Its form a living metaphor for the god who measured stars, recorded laws, and preserved truth. The jackal, in contrast, was a creature of the desert, sleek and watchful, often prowling near cemeteries. Its association with death was natural, for jackals were guardians of the boundary between the living and the dead. Anubis, with his jackal head, embodied this role perfectly. He was the protector of tombs, the guide of souls, the one who ensured that death was not chaos, but transition. The jackal's keen senses and silent movements reflected Anubis' vigilance, his ability to guard the dead from harm and lead them safely into eternity. Together, the ibis and the jackal formed a symbolic balance. One represented wisdom, the other guardianship. One preserved knowledge, the other protected souls. Their forms were not chosen for beauty alone, but for meaning, each animal reflecting the divine role it embodied. In temples and tombs, these symbols appeared constantly, carved into stone, painted on walls, etched into amulets. They reminded mortals that the gods were near, that wisdom and death were not distant abstractions, but living truths, embodied in creatures that walked beside them. The ibis and the jackal were more than animals. They were eternal emblems of balance, guardians of Egypt's deepest mysteries. In the sacred rhythm of Egyptian life, rituals were more than ceremonies. They were bridges between mortals and gods. Every offering, every chant, every gesture carried meaning, binding the living to eternity. At the heart of these practices stood Anubis and Thoth, guardians whose presence ensured that rituals were not empty motions, but acts of cosmic balance. Anubis was invoked in funerary rites, his jackal form guiding priests as they prepared bodies for the afterlife. The embalming chamber was filled with the scent of oils and resins, linen wrapped carefully around limbs, prayers whispered into the silence. Each step was precise, each movement sacred, for the Egyptians believed that without proper ritual, the soul would wander lost. Anubis was the overseer, ensuring that the dead were honored, their journey protected, their passage secure. Thoth's guardianship was subtler, but no less vital. He was present in the words spoken, the hymns recited, the scrolls inscribed. Rituals required precision, and Thoth's wisdom ensured that prayers were timed with the movement of stars, that offerings aligned with cosmic order, that ceremonies reflected truth. His influence was felt in the rhythm of chants, in the careful tally of offerings, in the recording of every sacred act. Together, they embodied guardianship in its fullest sense. Anubis protected the body and soul. Thoth preserved the word and wisdom. Their partnership ensured that rituals were not mere tradition, but acts of balance, connecting mortals to the divine. For the Egyptians, guardianship was not only about protection, but about continuity. Rituals carried the living into harmony with the gods, and the gods carried the dead into eternity. In every temple, every tomb, every household prayer, the guardianship of Anubis and Thoth lingered, steady and eternal, shaping the way mortals lived, died, and remembered. The legacy of Egypt was not built on stone alone, but on the wisdom that guided its people. And at the heart of that wisdom stood Thoth. His influence stretched far beyond temples and scrolls, shaping the very foundations of civilization. To the Egyptians, Thoth was not simply a god of knowledge. He was the architect of order, the silent force that ensured their society endured for millennia. Thoth's gift of writing transformed Egypt into a culture of permanence. Scribes recorded harvests, laws, and myths, preserving memory against the erosion of time. Without his invention, the deeds of pharaohs, the prayers of priests, and the stories of gods would have vanished into silence. Writing gave Egypt continuity, allowing wisdom to pass from one generation to the next, binding the past to the future. His role as keeper of time was equally vital. By measuring the movements of the moon and stars, Thoth gave Egypt its calendar, aligning festivals with cosmic rhythms. Agriculture depended on this precision, for the Nile's floods had to be predicted, planting had to be timed, and harvests had to be planned. Thoth's wisdom ensured that survival was not left to chance, but guided by celestial order. In law and governance, his presence lingered. Pharaohs ruled with divine authority, but their decrees were recorded and preserved by scribes under Thoth's blessing. Justice was tied to truth, and truth was tied to Thoth. His influence ensured that society did not collapse into chaos, that fairness was upheld, that balance was maintained. Even in religion, Thoth's impact was profound. Rituals were timed by his calculations, prayers preserved by his script, myths shaped by his mediation. He was the god who restored harmony when disputes arose among deities, the one who reminded mortals that wisdom was as sacred as faith. Through writing, timekeeping, law, and ritual, Thoth's influence permeated every corner of Egyptian civilization. He was not a ruler of armies or a builder of monuments, but his wisdom was the foundation upon which Egypt stood, steady, eternal, and unyielding. In the vast collection of Egyptian myths, Anubis appears not as a figure of terror, but as a steady companion. His jackal head, sleek and watchful, was a reminder that death was not chaos but a passage, and his calm presence reassured mortals that their journey into eternity would not be faced alone. Stories often placed Anubis at the threshold of the afterlife, guiding souls through the hall of judgment. He did not roar or threaten. Instead, he stood silently by the scales, ensuring that the weighing of the heart was fair. His role was not to condemn but to protect, to steady trembling spirits as they faced the truth of their deeds. In this way, Anubis became a symbol of trust, a guardian whose presence brought peace in the most uncertain moment of existence. Myths also described him as a protector of tombs, wandering the desert at night to guard the resting places of the dead. His jackal form was chosen not for menace but for vigilance, reflecting the animal's natural role as a watchful guardian near cemeteries. Egyptians believed that Anubis kept chaos away, ensuring that the silence of the tomb remained undisturbed. Even in tales of divine conflict, Anubis was calm. He did not seek power or conquest, but fulfilled his duty with quiet precision. His presence reminded mortals and gods alike that death was not to be feared but respected, that the passage into eternity was sacred, and that balance must always be preserved. Through these myths, Anubis became more than a god of death. He was a companion in silence, a protector in shadow, a guardian whose calm presence reassured mortals that their souls would not be forgotten. His mythology was not filled with thunder or spectacle, but with quiet strength, a reminder that even in endings there is peace. In the grand vision of Egyptian civilization, the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a living bridge between mortals and the divine. His authority was believed to flow directly from the gods, and every act of governance carried spiritual weight. Yet behind this sacred kingship stood figures like Thoth and Anubis, whose presence shaped the way pharaohs ruled and how their power was understood. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was often imagined as the divine scribe who recorded the deeds of kings. In temple reliefs, he appeared beside pharaohs, inscribing their victories, their offerings, and their prayers onto eternal scrolls. His presence affirmed that the pharaoh's actions were not fleeting, but preserved in cosmic memory. To rule with Thoth's blessing was to rule with truth, order, and balance, qualities essential to maintaining the harmony of the universe. Anubis, meanwhile, was tied to the pharaoh's eternal role as guardian of the dead. He ensured that kings were properly embalmed, their tombs protected, their souls guided into the afterlife. Pharaohs were not only rulers in life, but eternal figures in death, and Anubis' guardianship guaranteed that their legacy endured. His calm vigilance reminded mortals that even the most powerful king required guidance when stepping into eternity. Ceremonies often depicted pharaohs standing between gods, receiving blessings, or offering gifts. These rituals were not symbolic alone. They reinforced the belief that the pharaoh's authority was divine, his rule sanctioned by wisdom and protected by guardianship. Thoth gave him knowledge, Anubis gave him safe passage, and together they ensured that kingship was both earthly and eternal. Through this interaction, the pharaoh became more than a mortal leader. He was the embodiment of divine will, a ruler whose power was shaped by gods, whose memory was preserved in scrolls, and whose soul was guarded in shadow. The relationship between gods and pharaohs was not distant, but intimate, a partnership that defined Egypt's strength and its vision of eternity. Egyptian mythology was more than a collection of stories. It was a vessel of wisdom, carrying teachings that shaped the way mortals understood life, death, and the cosmos. Each tale was layered with meaning, its symbols and characters serving as guides to truths that reached beyond the visible world. In these myths, the gods were not distant figures, but teachers, their actions preserving lessons for generations. Thoth, the god of wisdom, appeared often as a mediator, restoring harmony when chaos threatened. His role in myth was not only to resolve disputes among gods, but to remind mortals that balance was sacred. Through his stories, Egyptians learned that truth must be preserved, that knowledge was a shield against disorder, and that wisdom was the foundation of civilization. His teachings were hidden in the rhythm of the stars, the precision of calendars, and the permanence of writing. Anubis, guardian of the dead, carried lessons of trust and protection. Myths described him guiding souls through judgment, his calm presence ensuring fairness. These stories taught Egyptians that death was not to be feared, but respected, that endings were part of the eternal cycle, and that guardianship was as vital as wisdom. His jackal form symbolized vigilance, reminding mortals that even in silence there was guidance. Other myths wove together cosmic truths. The weighing of the heart revealed the importance of living with integrity. The battles of gods reflected the struggle between order and chaos. The journeys through the underworld taught resilience and faith. Each narrative carried mystical teachings, preserved not in books alone, but in ritual, art, and memory. For the Egyptians, myth was not entertainment, but instruction. It was a way to understand the universe, to live in harmony with Mat, the principle of truth and balance. Through the stories of Thoth, Anubis, and countless other gods, wisdom was preserved, guardianship ensured, and the mysteries of existence revealed. In the heart of Egyptian belief, wisdom and the afterlife were inseparable. To live with knowledge was to prepare for eternity, and to honor truth was to ensure that the soul would find peace beyond death. The teachings of Thoth and the guardianship of Anubis together formed a vision of existence that stretched far beyond the mortal span, weaving life and death into one continuous journey. Thoth's wisdom reminded mortals that every action carried weight, every word left a mark. His scrolls preserved the deeds of kings and commoners alike, ensuring that memory endured. To live with wisdom was to live in harmony with Mat, the principle of truth and balance. Egyptians believed that knowledge was not only power in life, but protection in death. For the soul's journey required guidance, and Thoth's teachings offered that light. Anubis, calm and watchful, embodied the promise that death was not chaos, but transition. His presence in funerary rituals reassured families that their loved ones would not wander lost. He guided souls through judgment. His jackal eyes, steady as hearts, were weighed against the feather of truth. To trust Anubis was to trust that endings were not destruction, but passage, that silence was not emptiness, but eternity. Together, wisdom and guardianship shaped the Egyptian vision of the afterlife. Life was lived with integrity, guided by Thoth's teachings, and death was embraced with trust, protected by Anubis' vigilance. The two gods reflected the balance of existence. One preserved knowledge, the other ensured safe passage, both reminding mortals that eternity was not to be feared but respected. In reflecting on wisdom and the afterlife, the Egyptians found peace. They saw life as preparation, death as continuation, and the gods as companions who walked beside them in both realms. Their civilization endured because it was built not only on stone, but on belief, the belief that wisdom and guardianship carried the soul beyond the horizon into the eternal embrace of balance and truth. Above the sands of Egypt stretched a sky that was more than beauty, it was order, a living map of the universe. The Egyptians gazed at the stars, not as distant lights, but as divine symbols, each constellation a reminder that the heavens mirrored the balance of the earth. The night sky was their calendar, their compass, their sacred text written across eternity. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was believed to be the keeper of this cosmic order. His scrolls recorded the movements of the moon, the waxing and waning that marked months and guided festivals. He measured the stars, ensuring that rituals aligned with celestial rhythms, that agriculture followed the Nile's floods, that life itself flowed in harmony with the heavens. To the Egyptians, the night sky was Thoth's library, each star a word in his eternal script. Anubis, though guardian of the dead, was also tied to the night. His jackal form prowled the shadows, reflecting the silence of the desert under starlight. He was imagined as a protector in darkness, ensuring that souls did not wander lost beneath the vast sky. The constellations themselves seemed to echo his vigilance, steady and unyielding, guiding mortals through the mysteries of death as the stars guided travelers across the sands. The Egyptians saw the cosmos as a reflection of Mat, the principle of truth and balance. The rising of Orion, the glow of Sirius, the steady path of the moon, all were signs that the universe was ordered, that chaos was held at bay. Priests studied the heavens, timing rituals to celestial events, believing that to honor the gods was to honor the rhythm of the stars. In this vision, the night sky was not distant, but intimate. It was a reminder that mortals were part of a greater order, that their lives were woven into the fabric of the cosmos. Through Thoth's wisdom and Anubis' guardianship, the Egyptians found assurance that the universe was steady, eternal, and filled with meaning. The journey through Egypt's myths reveals more than gods and rituals. It uncovers lessons that shaped how mortals lived, dreamed, and faced eternity. At the heart of these teachings stand Anubis and Thoth, guardians of shadow and wisdom, companions who walked beside humanity in both life and death. Anubis, calm and watchful, taught that death was not chaos but transition. His presence in funerary rites reminded Egyptians that endings were sacred, that the soul's journey required guidance, and that protection was always near. He embodied trust, showing that even in silence there was companionship, even in darkness there was direction. Thoth, patient and precise, taught that wisdom was eternal. His scrolls preserved memory. His calculations aligned mortals with the stars. His mediation restored harmony when chaos threatened. He embodied truth, showing that knowledge was not only power in life, but assurance in death, a light that carried the soul into eternity. Together, they reflected the balance of existence. One guarded the soul, the other preserved its story. One stood in shadow, the other in light. Their lessons reminded mortals that life and death were not opposites, but partners, woven into the same eternal rhythm. To live with wisdom was to prepare for eternity. To trust in guardianship was to embrace peace in endings. And so, the story of Anubis and Thoth is not only about gods, but about humanity. It is about the need for guidance, the value of truth, and the assurance that balance endures. Egypt's strength lay not only in its monuments, but in its belief that wisdom and guardianship carried the soul beyond the horizon, into the eternal embrace of balance and peace. The sands grow quiet now, the stars shimmer softly above, and the guardians of shadow and wisdom watch silently as the world drifts into rest. Their lessons linger, steady and eternal, carrying us gently into the night. Good night.